everyone. Cultivating Success is a program that was established in 2000 by University of Idaho Extension, Rural Roots, and Washington State University. And Cultivating Success is the small farms program that actually hosts this webinar series. We have a series that is taking place this year over 4 different days. It's a little bit different structure than we've done in the past. So you'll have 2 topics for each webinar. Today's topics are an introduction to direct farm marketing in Idaho and choosing the best business structure. Our overall webinar series is going to take place over 4 days. And so as you can see on the screen, we have 4 different sessions, 2 topics each. And the reason that we chose these topics is that we have a lot of questions around things like business structures, insurance and liability, labor. And then we have some things that are a little bit less known for direct farm marketers. And that's specific rules about products, quarantines, maybe some of the voluntary certifications that are popular within our state, as we have some diversity depending on what region you live in. We also have a lot of questions about poultry processing and eggs and value-added products. So the way the webinar series is designed is that we're going to have an expert in each subject area from either the University of Idaho or an agency talk about the specific topic. And then we're going to have an expert farmer also talk about that particular topic in the context of their farm. So at Cultivating Success, we really believe that there are many different kinds of expertise that comes out of the university and our agencies that tends to be research-based or really focused on rules and regulations. But then we also 100% value the expertise of farmers and ranchers who are actually doing the work out in the real world. And so it's really important to us when we put our educational programs together that you hear both types of expertise, and that's how this webinar series is designed. So for our first topic today, Introduction to Direct Farm Marketing, I'm really delighted that we have Diane Green with us. Diane is a certified Cultivating Success farmer mentor. She has been involved in Cultivating Success since before 2000 because she was on the original team of university and farm folks that developed the program. And she is also one of the people that is organizing this year's series. In addition to working with us on this webinar series, Diane is working with us on developing a direct farm marketing guide. And I'll talk a little bit more about that guide at the end of today's program. So I am Colette DePhelps. I'm an area extension educator with University of Idaho, located on the Moscow campus, and I lead the Idaho Cultivating Success program, along with a great team of extension educators across the state and our program coordinator, Mackenzie Lawrence. Mackenzie is standing by and she's going to be able to help you if you have any technical issues today. So you might consider closing the other programs that are running on your computer. The more windows you have open, perhaps the less bandwidth you might have for this webinar. But if at any time you're having trouble with sound, you can check your email with the link to this webinar and use the call-in number to use the telephone for your audio. If you do that, you're going to want to click on the little mic in your control bar and make sure you click switch to telephone for your audio. And that means you won't get any feedback, but you can also mute your computer when using the phone. We do have a chat box also in that control bar. At any time, you can type in any type of issues you might be having that are technologically based. And as I said, Mackenzie's standing by to help you with that. For the speakers today and at all of our webinars, you can type your questions for the speakers into the Q&A box. We know that throughout this webinar series, we're going to be touching on some different things that have to do with rules and regulations within Idaho. If you want to be anonymous in answering your question, you can do that by selecting that option in the Q&A box. Again, if you have any trouble using that Q&A box, please type something in the chat and Mackenzie can help you. We are recording this webinar, and the webinar and a handout with all of the slides will be available from the Cultivating Success website later this week. With that, I'm going to jump into topic number 1, which is going to be presented by Diane Green on direct farm marketing in Idaho. So Diane, please go ahead and take care of the screen, and you can share your slides.
Are you seeing my slides?
Yep, seeing your slides.
Oh, goody. I'm always so happy when that works. Well, being a farmer and learning to do the techie stuff is not the easiest thing in the world, but I'm learning to adapt. I'm happy that we can be together today, and we've got a mass amount of snow still on the ground here. I don't know what it's like where you guys are, but good to be able to be home and cozy and warm and be able to go through this with you today. I'm excited to be a part of this whole series, and it's been fun figuring things out and going through the process. Trying to get next slide to work. We're not going forward. Yeah, so much of the techie stuff.
Diane, if you try to just take your mouse and just click once anywhere on your slide and then try again.
Okay. Next. Well, we'll start with a little history about myself and Greentree Naturals. We actually celebrated 30 years of being certified organic in 2022, which was a real milestone for us. We've come a long way since we began at our first farmers market. I think it was when the Sandpoint Farmers Market first started in something like 1989. So we started with the farmers market, and then we added restaurants. We added one restaurant and another one, and at one point we had 6 restaurants that we were juggling and started working with caterers. And then we added a CSA, and I added things in order of how I have them listed here. We started with an on-farm stand, which we did on and off for a number of years, and we've always sold direct to consumers. And we've done a bit of agritourism with field days and farm tours and an assortment of on-farm events, which I'll talk more about later. And we do a little bit of online sales and an assortment of value-added products. And we sold to the local natural food store for about 20 years. And we just made a major shift in our marketing last year. And as my husband and I are moving into our senior years, we are trying to downsize a little bit. And after 30 years of doing all these different types of markets, we last year downsized to only have our on-farm stand. And that was a big thing for us, and really wonderful. I mean, it's the closest thing to retirement that we will experience, because we're a working farm, and we'll keep on working with that. I always tell the joke that for a farmer, I saw a bumper sticker one time, and it said, for farmers, retirement means I was tired today and I'll be tired again tomorrow. So, but we love what we do, and we love being able to share with our community. And I'm hopeful that I can share some different perspectives for you today. I don't know why I need to hit this every time, but we'll see. So farmers markets are a great place to begin for your sales if you're just starting out, or depending on how you're going. But it's a great way to meet customers, and it really, direct sales to the consumer really encourages those marketing relationships. And that is truly what farmers markets are about. It's about establishing a relationship directly with your customers. It gives you more control over your product and maintaining quality until it reaches the customer, versus taking it to a store where they resell it and reprocess it or do whatever they do. But one of the things about the farmer's market is for starting out, it's all about building a new clientele, and it's really important that you make those connections and think about why would a customer choose you. You go to the farmer's market, and depending on the size of the market, like at the Sandpoint market, we've got about 60, well, we used to have about 60 farm vendors. I'm not sure, things have kind of shifted since COVID, but why would a customer choose you like in the springtime when everybody has really similar products, and you have to give them some reason why they would want to buy from you over someone else. For us, it's always been about providing a quality product, but it's also, a lot of it has been about in establishing that relationship. In the early days, and I still do this, I always keep something free to give away to new customers. Like I might keep a bucket of flowers and hand out a single stem flower, or in the early years, I would always keep, we always grow a lot of parsley. I'd keep small bunches of parsley so I could hand those out as a freebie. And I think about why I choose to support different businesses, and it's always about what that relationship is like and how I feel about it. So I feel that one way to bring in a loyal customer is to treat them well, and they'll remember that and they'll want to come back. And thinking about what your customers want, I always kept a notebook at my booth at the farmer's market, and I would listen to what the customers were saying. If they came by my booth and were asking about something and I didn't have it, I'd make note of it. One of the things that really changed for us was listening. Sandpoint's a tourist-based economy during the summertime, and listening to a lot of the travelers coming through, they would always say with our packaged vegetables that they wanted something smaller. So we started packaging things in smaller portions, like snow peas, for example. And because they didn't have a refrigeration for it. And that ended up bringing us into a place where we could charge a little bit more for a smaller package. Thinking about who your competition is, that's a really good thing to, if you can take the time to walk around your market before opening every week and just see what everyone else has. It gives you a perspective of what's out there. And also when your customers come and they ask for something and you don't have it, it's really nice to be able to refer them to another vendor and show that support to the grower community there. And hopefully those other vendors will refer back to you. But customers really appreciate that when you can say, well, sorry, I don't have that, but maybe we can pass that on. And one other thing about farmers markets that I see that often doesn't happen is a lot of people go and don't have a farm name. So you need to find a way for people to recognize you and remember you, and business cards are a great thing to have. And if you don't have a farm name, you can just come up with anything that you can. We've had Bill's Farm or the potato farm or the flower farm or the veggie farm, whatever, but something so that your customers, when they come back, can easily recognize who you are and find you again. And also putting a tag or something on your bag or a card in their bag so they remember who they bought from is a good way to get repeat customers. So selling produce to restaurants, after we had a few years under our belt with selling to farmers market, we started with one restaurant in Sandpoint. And one of the things with working with restaurants, it really needs to be the type of restaurant that the owner and the chef, which are often the same, but sometimes they're two different people, that they care about supporting local growers. And these days, the local food movement is so important, and any high-end restaurant is going to want local produce. And with that, a lot of those fine dining establishments are going to put you on the menu. We've had them put photos of us up in the restaurant, along with having our farm name on their menu, which is a great way to have people recognize who you are at the farmer's market. I know that was always pleasant to have people come and say they enjoyed some of our salad greens at one of the restaurants. But the main thing is in choosing a restaurant, you want to really work with the buyer's schedule, whether that's the chef or the owner, and be consistent so that you're either texting or calling them the same day and the same time. When you approach them, you want to find out what works for them and really work with that, because all the restaurants are very busy, and that's a part of creating and developing a positive relationship with them. And the restaurants are pretty changeable. We have found that restaurants in our community often only last about 3 years. There's been a few of them that are still in business, but oftentimes they tend to rotate fairly often. So it's good to look for different opportunities so you can keep that happening. And with the restaurants, one of the things is sitting down with the chef, and I mean, a lot of times you have to educate them about why they should support you, because they're used to buying from food service providers who are growing from corporate farms that are far away, short shelf life, and generally half the price of what I would be offering something for. We're, as small acreage farmers, we are not competing with corporate farms. We are providing something that, because it's local, because it's fresh and was picked a couple days ago, the flavor is at its ultimate, and it's the best of the best. And a lot of them really appreciate that and want that, and you can charge accordingly for that. And one of the things with restaurants too is really looking at, like, these are baby patty pans. Patty pans are something that I never sold at the farmer's market. I mean, they're small, very small size that the restaurant wants for stuffing. And one of the things that if you do choose to work with a chef, you need to find out what sizes of produce they want, because they're not going to want a big squash to have a nice plate like this. One of the things we also do, we only work with one restaurant now, and we just are providing edible flowers since we've downsized, and we like doing that. When we first started selling to restaurants, we had no reference. We couldn't find anything. And of course, this was back in 1996. So I did write a book on selling produce to restaurants to kind of go through the basics, and that's kind of been my way of doing things, is figure things out, write about it, teach about it, and go on. So I do have that, and that's been a helpful thing to, sometimes if you're teaching things, you learn a lot about what you're teaching from what you're teaching sometimes. So with our community supported agriculture, after at one point we had 6 restaurants, and we're really going great guns with that. And then 3 of our restaurants went out of business. And that's when we realized the importance of diversity in our marketing. And I think it's really important to think about the fact that we grow a diversity of products at our farms, whether you're doing vegetables or herbs or flowers. I think it's really important that we look at diversity in how we market what we grow, because things happen, like with the restaurants. When we started with the CSA, I went to a conference and that was specifically geared towards establishing CSAs, and we learned about that and started out with 5 shares And with the CSAs, if you're not familiar with that, basically the customer will pay a set amount at the beginning of the season, which gives you upfront capital. And in return, they receive a weekly allotment of produce. Although I've seen, I was just in Oregon, and some friends of mine had signed up for a seafood CSA. And I know some people have signed up for beef and pork and chicken CSAs, where they get a share of different meats delivered weekly. So the big thing with going into doing a CSA, the main thing that I've seen as an issue is people tend to start out trying to sell too many shares. And I think, like with anything, when you're starting out learning something new, it's really a good idea to start small and keep good notes and see what works well for you. Because a lot of farmers get in trouble by, they do their first CSA and get 50 members to sign up, and they have all this money to start out, which is great. But then as the season progresses, they're not able to provide the quality and quantity that they promised. And it's really about integrity of you as a farmer, that if people are prepaying in the season for something, that you're going to give them a fair share of your garden. So I generally, in figuring out CSAs, will do it in a way that I'm actually doing market value and come up with a figure that works with that. I see with farm stands, I see more and more farm stands popping up all around our region, and I'm hoping that that's happening in your area as well. One of the things in working with farm stands or having a farm stand, you really need to check in and look at zoning requirements for your local county, because different counties do have different regulations associated with requirements like how much distance you are from the road, parking space, blocking the road, that kind of thing is really a crucial aspect of it. And one of the things about having a farm stand is you have people, the public, strangers coming on to your property, and that really brings on different types of risks that are liability to you, that you have to be careful about. I mean, we've had a number of different things happen at our farm that were accidents and injuries to visitors that came to our farm stand or to our farm for different things. And I will be talking about that in one of our sessions tomorrow about liability issues on the farm, to give you some more perspective about that. But it's really important that you do that. And a lot of farm stands are self-serve, and if you do that, you need to have a slotted lock box where people can put the money in there and have that bolted down. Our farm stand is 1 day a week, and we only do it from 3 to 5:30, and I'm there selling to the customers, and that's how we do it. But there's a lot of different ways you can do that as far as making those on-farm sales. And it's been really beneficial for us. So agritourism is another one, and that what's technically agritourism would include U-pick and farm stands, school visits to the farm, harvest dinners, hay rides, a corn maze, excuse me, farm stays, things like that. We do on-farm workshops. We do I have a 7-week organic gardening workshop series. We also have a garlic grading workshop every year. And one of the things with agritourism, again, you've got the public coming to your farm. So that's a risk management issue that you really need to be thinking about and moving through. So, and we'll be talking a lot about that through the series. And one of the things that is most important, that we consider the risks associated with what we're doing to protect our farms and our well-being. So, and agritourism is really fun, and people love coming to the farm. And when we have our farm stand, we are open, our gardens are open to the public to come have walkabouts in the gardens, and people really like that. And that kind of goes back to the relationship marketing, because it is about building relationships with your customers. So seed production is something that we started doing about 4 years ago. We started growing some seed for Snake River seeds out of Boise. And we've learned, we've always been seed savers and saving seed for ourselves, but we've really learned a lot about seed production commercially and how different that is than just saving for ourselves. But in Idaho, I'm sure you've noticed when you go to order seeds, if you order seeds online or through a seed catalog, you'll see an awful lot of those seed catalogs have a statement that says not available, can't deliver to Idaho, can't sell to Idaho. And that's because in Idaho, we have quarantines to protect some of the large production farms from disease. And we will be having a session that covers quarantines that will go through that information. But we have quarantines for things like nursery stock coming in from out of state, florist, flower stock, feed has to be very specific. If you're bagging at fertilizer, there's specific quarantines for honeybees coming in from out of state. There's certain regulations associated with that. Hops as well. The southern part of the state is not able to sell hops. The northern part of the state can sell hops. So the point of that being some of the regulations have variances depending on location. And onions are one that you can't, I always want onion starts and I can never get them because they don't deliver to Idaho. So we have to start our own. Garlic is another one that has some great restrictions because there's specific diseases associated with some of those crops like onions, and Idaho is a big onion producer. So the quarantines are to protect from bringing those diseases in. And like I said, we will be having a session specifically to talk about that. But seed production has been a really nice addition to what we grow. And I love that our seeds are going out across the country and being grown in different people's gardens. And it's really a satisfying thing to do. And if you don't do it commercially, just growing your own seed is pretty important. So certifications and eco labels, and we'll be having a session that focuses on this as well. So there's a number of different types of certifications and the difference between a certification and eco labels, basically a certification means you're filling out paperwork and applying to be certified, which means it's often like with the organic certification. Like I said, we've been certified organic for 30 years. It's a pretty intensive application process, but where some of the others, real organic is another certification that we also have. And you have to apply and typically be inspected for each of these. The certified naturally grown as well. It's an application process and you're inspected. Typically, a lot of these do have a fee associated with them. For eco labels, they generally do not have a fee that goes with them, but they're generally a voluntary labeling that shows that you are, they're kind of considered environmental labels, and it's just a way of you saying that you do a little bit more, and hopefully you're have the integrity that you're actually doing what you're saying you're doing on those, because a lot of them don't have an inspection associated with them. But like I've seen labels for sustainably grown, certified humane, pesticide free, certified vegan, certified wildlife friendly, fair trade. Some of those do have certifications, some of those don't, but I know a lot of farmers at the farmers market who are not certified organic will put up a sign, excuse me, will put up a sign that says pesticide free, no sprays, and promote their product showing that they are chemical free and raising humanely or whatever. And that's, a lot of people want that. Some will put naturally grown. There's actually no regulation for that whatsoever. We all see naturally grown and we have an image in our mind of what that means, but it really doesn't mean anything. There's no regulation that tells us what natural is. And working on this project this year, and I worked on it when we first developed the Protecting Your Farmer Ranch series, which is really about risk and for the farmers and finding ways for us to be able to work through it and understand it a little bit more clearly. I was really surprised at some of the things that I found as far as labeling goes. So it's good to be informed, and it's good to put those labels out there, because if consumers want more information, and it does matter a lot to consumers what they're buying. I mean, you'll have those that it really matters, and you'll have those that don't really care. But I know for those that support us and have supported us for the last 30 years, every week at the farm stand and every week at the farmers market over the years, I always had customers saying, thank you for going the extra mile to be certified organic. Thank you for growing good, healthy food for my children. So that makes it all worthwhile. So one of the things when you think about selling into different markets, and remember that diversity of where you sell and how you sell what you have is really important. There's, it seems like so many things that I want to do are illegal. They're not, or they're illegal, or there's rules and regs associated with it. And if I don't do my due diligence and follow through with meeting those different requirements, I could get in trouble. I haven't so far, but as I learn what the different rules and regulations are, that's a part of the process of making me a better food provider for my community by being well informed. And the thing is, it is different with different markets. I can sell head lettuce at the farmer's market just fine, but if I go to sell it at the grocery store, they may have a very different regulation associated with that. And when it comes to food safety regulations, things like lettuce at the farmer's market, you can sell whole head lettuce, or you can sell whole leaf for salad mix. If you start chopping things up, that's going to require a commercial kitchen, and it's going to require a whole different process to sell that. And it's all about food safety and doing that in a way that you can provide a safe food product to your customers. So those are important things to think about and important things to know. So do you know what you need before you take the next steps when you're going to sell a new product? I think it's really important that you take the time to do some research. Don't just jump into doing something new without finding out. And that's one of the things that's nice about the farmer's market. You can talk to your other vendors and see what they're doing and find out. But you have allies through the small farms program at the university. You have myself, you have our whole team through Cultivating Success, where you can reach out and ask questions if you're not comfortable with talking with the agency folks. And one of the reasons why we set this up so you could ask questions anonymously, because when we are going to have a number of agency folks presenting and sharing information that's really important information, but sometimes we get a little intimidated by that. And we don't want to ask some of the questions that really need to be asked because for fear of repercussions. So that's why we set this up so you could ask some questions anonymously when the agency folks are on. So hopefully that will be helpful for you, but ask questions, do your homework, do some checking. I love this picture of the cat sleeping on the beware of dog sign because it's really the perfect picture for risk management and the regulatory environment. Because production and marketing are just a little bit of what we face as farmers, but we have to be aware of the food risks with marketing and production and employment and insurance and consider the legal issues. We absolutely have to think about liability associated with what we have going on. And like I said, I will be talking a lot about farm liability and important things that we need to be considering. And sometimes finding information about the rules and regulations can just be challenging and intimidating, which often leads to us not doing anything at all. And I hear repeatedly, well, I'm just going to do it until somebody tells me I shouldn't be doing it. Well, sometimes that's not the best way to be managing risk. But I think gathering information and being well informed is really the best thing you can do to protect your farm or ranch and protect yourself from potential problems. The cows. So we make decisions every single day that affect our farming operations. And many of those factors that affect the decisions we make can't be predicted with complete accuracy. I mean, that's considered a risk. And it's always something, always something. I can tell you that every single year of 30 years of farming, I find myself saying, huh, this has never happened before. Whether it's with the weather, which is constantly changing, and it's impossible to know what it's going to be like. There is no more normal as far as the weather. I always tell my students, if you're going to garden or grow in North Idaho, always plan for the hottest, driest, wettest, coldest in recorded history. And that's absolutely so. But as the weather conditions change, our pests change in the garden, there's always something. I wanted to stay with that. It's always something, period. So those are things that we have to be making clear observations and really being proactive. And a part of being proactive is understanding that there's certain risk management skills that are helpful for us so we can better anticipate problems and reduce the consequences, because stuff happens and we want to be prepared for that, whether that's somebody leaving the gate out and the cows wandering down the road, or leaving the gate open and a goat jumping up on a car and scratching someone's car that's visiting, or just a number of things. And we'll talk more about that when we get to the next session. So one of the things that this was in our protecting your farm or ranch, and I think these are really important things, and that this is associated with everything that we're talking about as far as farm marketing and direct farm marketing. And while everything we do, our goal is to grow a product, whether that's vegetables or herbs or flowers or beef or pork or chickens or eggs or value added products. I mean, there's a lot of things that we can do on our farms to make an income and be sustainable. But the first general rule is to really keep being a farm. When it comes down to the more your operation begins to look like something other than a traditional farm, like a recreational venture with a corn maze, the more likely you're going to be encountering increasing number of state and local laws and regulations. I know one of our neighbor farmers has expanded to include a corn maze and a pumpkin patch, and they now have a jumping house. I don't know what you call those. And they also have a trampoline, which would be really scary to me. But so the second one here is really as a result of this rule. Also, the less you look like a traditional farm, the less likely you're to be protected by the special rules, which are related to farming, to protect farming, like exemptions from zoning rules or specific labor laws. And with that, it would be along the lines of, well, I'm not sure what it would be along the lines of. I don't know everything, but it's important that you be thinking about changes and how the regulations and the local zoning rules affect your farm. Because if you're, depending on if you're urban or rural or city, the rules do shift. And I mean, there is a big difference with urban zoning rules versus rural zoning rules as far as what you're allowed to do. And as far as specific labor laws, those kind of move around quite a bit too. So if you're hiring labor, whether it's contract labor or interns or workers, employees, students, those are all things that we will be talking about as we move through these sessions. And third, the more you look like a traditional farm, the less likely you are to be regulated in the first place. And to the extent regulations may apply, there may be special exemptions which apply to your farm. Like for us, when we built our farm stand, which is just a pole structure of, I think it's 14 by 14 foot, because it was a pole structure as a farm stand, we did go to planning and zoning and told them what we were going to do as a farm stand. There were specific regulations that we needed to be so far away from the road, that we needed for the farm stand, we needed to have ample parking space, but we actually had to apply and get a permit to prove that we didn't need a permit. So that when, I'm not sure why, but that's what we did. It didn't cost us anything. But we did our due diligence. That's the point. We went and found out what we needed to know, and we followed through with that. We also went through a process with our greenhouse and going and to planning and zoning and telling them what we were doing and finding out what the regulations were associated with that. So information is one of the best things you can do to protect yourself as a starting point. Gathering information and finding out what those rules and regs are so you can adjust accordingly. Fourth, the more you begin to resemble a large scale or full service retail food store, such as being open year round, handling a large range of processed foods that maybe you made or that you bought and brought in, carrying a lot of non-food items or carrying more items produced by others. I think the rule is if you're carrying 50% of what you are selling, you did not raise, that's really shifting what the regulations are as far as you having a roadside market. So you really need to be aware of that. And then fifth, bringing people onto your farm, whether they're workers or tourists or customers or you pickers. There's a lot of different liability issues associated with that. And it's really important that you be thinking about how you're going to protect your farm, how you're going to deal with the liability of that. And it's that information is power, and really being able to go through and deal with things in a way that you're protecting your farm or ranch is really important. So I hope that you will take the time to do that, and we will be talking much more about and providing some information about liability on the farm in future sessions. So I think we can open it up for questions, if there are any.
If anyone has a question, you can go ahead and put your question into the Q&A box. So thank you, Diane, for your presentation about this overview of direct farm marketing and talking about marketing strategies. But in addition, some of the considerations that you need to have in thinking about risk management and how to best operate your farm within what is often considered kind of a complex legal environment. Because when we start any business, we don't know what we don't know. And a lot of what we're doing in this webinar series, and particularly in the introduction and overview that Diane gave today, is bringing up some of the things that we hear about as educators and mentors of other farmers, questions people have or issues that they face. And over the next 4 sessions of this webinar, we're going to be delving deep into things like interns on the farm. What does it mean to have a volunteer? What are different kinds of insurance tools that can protect my farm from certain types of risk related to liability, both product liability or also liability of having different events on the farm. So thank you, Diane, for kind of laying up a lot of the different issues that we're facing. We do have a question that came in, and the question is, what are the rules about giving samples of produce at your farm stand or at your market?
You know, it really depends on what those things are. I mean, generally, when you start cutting up something and leaving it out, I mean, I'm sure there's a list, and I'm probably not the best person to answer that. I think when we have our food safety person, they'll be able to address that better. But there've been times where we did sampling, and the big thing, a lot of things changed with COVID. So and depending on what it is, like at the farm stand for produce, I will offer a sample of, like, for cherry tomatoes, it's a whole tomato, it's not sliced. I only offer samples of things that are not cut or sliced. So I always leave out a basket of cherry tomatoes and encourage people to try one. Some people will start eating the whole basket once they have them. So I have to encourage them to be buying them and not eating all my tomatoes. But I also will leave out, for sugar snap peas or snow peas, I'll leave out a basket of those with a sign that says try one. Beans, I'll do the same so they can see what the beans taste like. And a lot of people have never eaten a raw, fresh bean, but then when they taste it, they realize that how fresh it is and how flavorful it is. So I go on the side of caution and only offer samples of a whole vegetable. I don't know what those are small little veggie bits. And oftentimes at our farm stand, because it's really busy when it is open, because like I said, I'm only open for 2.5 hours. Some things, it often will be someone will be asking about sampling or asking about what it tastes like or how the flavor is, and another customer will be there answering for me. So I think you need to be really cautious as far as slicing things up and offering them out. And I think that would be a good question that we should save for the food safety folks. But for me, I only do whole veggies, but I also offer 100% satisfaction guarantee, which makes a big difference. And I think in 30 years, I've had one bag of basil complaint. So quality makes a difference, and offering a good flavor and fresh product makes a difference too. So I just say, try it, you'll like it.
Absolutely. And I'll just add a couple things around giving samples of produce at your farm stand or your farm market. In Idaho, we have health districts, and you're going to want to contact your health district and actually ask from your food safety advisor and inspector for your health district what the rules are. And they're going to be able to tell you exactly what the rules are from the perspective of the health district. If you are at a farmer's market may have rules that are in addition to that of the health district. So if you hear, for instance, that a market in Latah County is doing something different than a market that is farther north in Bonner County where Diane is, it may be because the actual market has a different rule. And so you'll need to check out with both your market manager and with your health district to know what those sampling requirements are. And then if you are a livestock producer and you're interested in doing sampling, let's say of a cooked meat product at market, you may be able to do that. But again, there's going to be rules that govern that. And you're going to need to talk to your health district and your market manager about that. We have another question, and this second question is, Diane, what's your favorite accounting software or tool to use to handle payroll?
To handle what?
Payroll.
Payroll? I don't have any employees.
I can say we are going to have a webinar on farm labor, and we are going to have a farmer from Moose Meadow Farm who is going to talk about specifically having employees on the farm. So that is a great question that we can hold for her. But also just in working with farmers over time and farmers that are using an accounting tool, many farmers are using QuickBooks. And I think there's a lot of things built into that software program that are helpful in managing a farm. And there's some specific things related to payroll that can be integrated into that tool. There is actually an extension educator located in Southern Idaho, Ron Patterson, who teaches a QuickBooks for Farms course. And we'd be happy to share information so that you would be able to contact and have a conversation with Ron about the different tools that he's aware of and what he's seen that farmers are doing in terms of payroll management.
Yeah, we have never had an employee. It's just my husband and I, and we've gone through we have 2 volunteers that come for 2 hours a week, and it's pretty much us. That's how we continue to be sustainable at what we do. We keep it to a size that we can manage.
We have a question about biosecurity on the farm. And for those of you that are really interested in biosecurity, I'll just give you a heads up that this May, we will have a 1 to 2 hour online workshop on biosecurity that is going to be offered by one of our extension educators that specializes in livestock on small farms. So we will be able to delve into this more deeply. The question for you, Diane, is how do you deal with preventing soil-borne diseases from coming to your farm on visitors' shoes?
That's something that we never really were concerned about until white rot started showing up in garlic in Bonner's Ferry, and some of those people coming down, and white rot will transfer on your shoes. And garlic is a large crop for us, so we have been concerned with that. With our two volunteers change their shoes when they come. As far as the coming, we only allow them, I mean, they only stay in the paths, but we probably are exposing ourselves to some risk with that. And our main concern would be that white rot in garlic, since that's the main thing that I can see that transfers on shoes. So far, so good. So we haven't, for the people that come and actually work with us, they change their shoes. Otherwise, as far as the public coming, they are not. So, but most of the public that comes are not farmers or growers, so they're not really in a situation where they would be exposed to that. So I haven't really been too concerned about it. So far, so good. Knock on wood.
This is a really interesting area that I think we're having more conversation about, especially as agritourism becomes a really important enterprise on many small farms. I attended a biosecurity workshop for agritourism this past fall in Vermont, and we had a really robust conversation about the foot wash, where you do the boot wash as a sanitizer option versus using booties. And one of the things that you really have to pay attention to in terms of having people come on the farm, if you are using a boot wash, is that you can't sanitize something that's dirty. So there would have to be a cleaning step. But also with many sanitizers, you have to wait 10 to 15 minutes before that sanitizer has actually taken full effect, which really is a challenge when you have visitors to the farm. So what we're recommending is that people actually purchase the disposable booties that are available very low cost and have people use those boot coverings when they're on the farm. If you have your own farm and it's a diversified crop and livestock farm, we recommend that you actually are really careful not to transfer anything from the livestock area into your plant production area, and that you actually have two different sets of boots. So you have a boot for your livestock zone and you have boots for your non-livestock zone. But again, we are going to delve into that more in May. As a participant in this webinar, you will be able to receive announcements about future programs through our Cultivating Success program. We'll automatically send those through our monthly email newsletter, so you will know when we schedule that webinar. We don't have any other questions right now. So Diane, thank you so much for your presentation this morning and for the questions that were asked from our audience. We are going to take just a 5-minute break while we transition between this presentation and a presentation on choosing the best business structure for your farm. So our next presentation, again, will be on choosing the best business structure for your farm. We'll just start with 2 or 3 minutes from now to transfer into that presentation, but we do want to give you an opportunity to get up and stretch, grab a glass of water, and we will reconvene at 11 o'clock sharp. Thank you. Welcome to the second topic of today's webinar. That topic is choosing the best business structure for your farm or ranch. We're really happy today to introduce you to Nick Smith, who's the director of University of Idaho's Entrepreneurship Law Clinic. Nick is located in Boise and is going to be giving a presentation about business structures and things to consider with business structures. And then we're going to follow up, and Diane is going to provide some of her experience with deciding what business structure has been best for her farm, Greentree Naturals. So Nick, thank you for joining us today. And if you would like to go ahead and share your slides on your screen, I will go ahead and stop share so you can do that.
Awesome. Good morning. I guess good afternoon from me. So I'm going to just jump into it. If you have questions as I'm going, I'm going to try to monitor them. I know sometimes it's easier to ask the question right when you have it rather than wait till the end. So by all means, and I'll give the very lawyerly caveat that this is not legal advice for you specifically. This is general advice. And I can hear what you're thinking. It's the same thing that my dad told me when I graduated from law school. He said, and I quote, "Lawyers are the worst." So it's true. But we're going to talk through some stuff about how to protect your farm. So goals for today, this is not a checklist or a how-to. You're not going to be able to take these slides and walk out and do everything you need to do. But I want to give you enough to make you think about what your next steps might be, and then give you some resources to move on to the next steps. And then the last part is, as I'm going, I want you to think about yourself and your situation. You will be somewhere in my slides. And when you find yourself, have your ears perk up and pay special attention, because I'm talking about you. So the first question of choosing an entity is, let's see if I can get this to go, is who cares? I think you should care, because oversimplifying generally, you have some stuff, you want to hold on to your stuff, and other people want to take your stuff. So business is risky. When I'm talking about stuff, I'm talking about personal assets that you might own. So you might own a house or some land. It's typically the single largest asset most people ever own or purchase. You may have car or cars. You have money flowing in from wages or business income. You maybe have a little pile of money somewhere, or maybe a big pile of money somewhere that you want to protect. You've got valuable equipment, tools, etc. Some equipment is necessary for you to run your business. Some of it is just nice to have. It makes your life easier. Either way, you want to hold on to it. And even if it's not about the stuff and the money, think about your ability to impact your family or your community, why you do what you do. It could be security. It could be taking care of your family. It could be taking care of somebody else's family, or it could be contributing to the community. All of those things, when I'm talking about the personal assets, your stuff that you want to protect, that's what I'm talking about. And so helpful thing to think about, how would losing your stuff impact your ability to do what you want to do? And the people who want your stuff, we're talking about lenders. If you don't pay them, they can foreclose. Landlords, they can evict you. You could lose your investment in the land you're on. Employees can sue for wages or work conditions, harassment. Incidentally, you are responsible for their bad choices. So you would be liable if they caused damage to somebody else while they were working. Customers, for example, can sue you if they're sick, they don't get what they paid for, if they slip and fall. Vendors like to get paid just like you. Contractors want to get paid, and you also might be responsible for their bad choices. Competitors, if you steal their logo, or their customers or their ideas, may want to come after your stuff. Regulators obviously can shut you down. The IRS will always get their due, plus penalties and interest. So the main point here is, I guess the takeaway is, not everybody is out to get you, but your business is surrounded by people who want your stuff. And so when I'm talking about protecting yourself from liability, this is the kind of stuff I'm talking about. So that's who who cares? I think you should care. I suspect you do care. And so what happens if you do nothing? So this is the part where I think many of you will find yourselves in my slides. So if you are doing business and you have not officially formed an LLC or a corporation or a few other types of entities, then you automatically will be either a sole practitioner if you're doing business by yourself, or you will be considered a general partnership if you're doing business with anybody else. So for example, if I grow carrots to sell, so that's me doing business, and I haven't registered my business with the Secretary of State, but I do it by myself, I will be considered a sole practitioner. If my brother and I grow carrots to sell, and we don't register with the Secretary of State, we'll be considered a general partnership. Why that matters? As a sole practitioner, I have zero protection. It's the same as it's just me. And so there's no barrier or shield or protection from any liability. So if I get sued, the creditor or the person suing me would be able to collect against any of my personal assets, whether they're related to the business or not. The same would be true of both me and my brother in this case, both in a general partnership. They could come after any of our personal assets, again, whether they're related to the business or not. So in a general partnership, in addition to liability, like a slip and fall or something like that, I would be also liable for any debt that my partner incurs, whether I know about it or not. So for example, if my brother comes home or comes back and says, hey, great news, I just got us a $50,000 loan to expand without telling me. If we don't pay that loan back, the lender can still come after my house. He can and can garnish my wages. So again, no protection, no personal protection. Quick note on the taxes. So if you're a sole practitioner, all of the income and expenses would be reported on your individual tax return. And in a general partnership, it's called pass-through taxation. So the partnership itself wouldn't have to pay taxes. It would get divvied up and then reported on your personal tax returns as well. So when I talk about not having any liability protection, hopefully you're thinking, well, isn't that a bad idea? And my answer to that, is no, it's not a bad idea. It's a terrible idea. So a sole proprietorship is, I will say, is usually a bad idea. It's like walking around barefoot when you know there are Legos out there on the hardwood floor. A general partnership, I'm willing to go on the record to say, is always a bad idea. It's like free climbing, being tethered to somebody else. It's incredibly risky for no reason. There's no real benefit that I can think of. And the barrier to get some protection, both from your partners and from other people, is relatively low. And so I will just leave this here to say doing nothing is not a great option, because there are better options that are not hard and not expensive. So if you do nothing, if you don't register with the Secretary of State, you are either a sole proprietorship or a general partnership. And I think in almost all circumstances, there is a better option for you. So we'll go. So that's what happens if you do nothing. We will go to, so one option you may have heard of, thought about, corporation. So this is any company that you see on the end, it says corp or inc or co or limited. So a corporation is kind of the oldest form of joint ownership. The owners are called shareholders. That's because you own shares. The options here, you can be a corporation just by yourself. So you can be the sole shareholder and own 100% of the shares. You can also own it with a lot of other people. Just like publicly traded companies have, thousands of shareholders. The taxes get taxed either as a C Corp, which is double taxation. So your corporation is going to pay income tax on the income that it makes, And then when it pays that money, the rest of the money over to you as the owner, you'll also pay income tax on the money that gets distributed to you. That's why it's called double taxation. There is another option for most small corporations are going to qualify as an S corp, and that would be a pass-through. So the corporation wouldn't pay income tax, just the individuals. Money gets split based on shares. So if there are 100 shares and I own 52 of those shares, I would get 52% of all of the revenue that, or not the revenue, of all of the money that gets distributed to the shareholders. Protection, this is the key part. Yes, personal assets are protected. So the corporation would be liable for anything, the assets that the corporation owns would be available to satisfy creditors or anybody that sues you. But as long as you maintain some corporate formalities, meaning as long as you continue to treat your business like a separate legal entity, then your personal assets that you haven't put into the corporation would be protected. So a creditor, for example, wouldn't be able to go and foreclose on your house unless the house was owned by the corporation. And then the last piece, control, who gets to make decisions. It's shareholders elect the board of directors, and the board of directors govern the company. So I say here it's rigid but predictable. So the key takeaway for me for corporations is that it's very predictable. They've been around for a long time, but they're a little bit bulky because they're old. There's rules that have grown up around corporations, and they're not very flexible. So for a small business owner that wants to either be a little bit creative or be nimble with how they own things, how they distribute things, a corporation might not be the best fit. They are relatively easy to form. So this is all of the information that you're required to give to the Secretary of State when you form a corporation. Really, really easy. But there's more. You also, these are various Idaho codes that say you actually have to adopt bylaws, which is another document you don't file with the Secretary of State. It's kind of the rules of how the corporation will be run. You have to give notice. There's certain shareholder rights. So just because you fill this form out doesn't mean you're done when it comes to a corporation. So there's more there. Who should form? So if you haven't formed a company yet or a formal business entity, and you're thinking that you ought to, if any of these is true about you, you might consider becoming a corporation. So I've said they're rigid, they're not very flexible, but there are times when corporations make sense. So for example, if you're going to bring on a lot of outside investors, or you're going to want to bring on outside capital, meaning somebody's going to write you a big check to be a part owner of your company, you might consider a corporation if you're going to go public, if you're going to be huge. Or the last caveat is always if your accountant tells you to, then you might consider being a corporation. I suspect, without knowing anything about anybody on this call, I suspect this probably doesn't describe anybody on this call. It may, but I suspect that a corporation might not be the best form for most of you. Which begs the question, well, which is the right form? And so we're going to talk about limited liability companies. This is the LLC, sometimes called an LC, limited company. Very similar to a corporation, but with some key differences. So the owners are called members instead of shareholders. You can own an LLC all by yourself. You can also own it with other people. The taxes, this is where you start to see some of that flexibility. So with a corporation, there were only two options. You could either be taxed as a C Corp, or you could be taxed as an S Corp. With a limited liability company, you can be, if it's just you, it's the same pass-through taxes. So you're a sole proprietor for tax purposes. So your income is still just reported on your regular personal tax return. If there's multiple owners, you could be taxed as a partnership, which is just like the general partnership, where you don't pay, the company itself wouldn't pay taxes. It would just pass the money through to the individuals who would pay taxes. You can also, depending on how big you get or what your structure is, you can also choose to be taxed as an S corp or a corporation. So you have lots of options. And that's going to be the theme you'll see as we sort of move through the rest of these features of an LLC, is that you have options and it's flexible. So money, for example, in a corporation, remember that if I owned 52 shares out of 100, I would get 52% of the income. You can, in an LLC, you can do whatever you want to do. So there are some times when, so you can split. So maybe I get 52% of the income, but I'm only responsible for 20% of the expenses. We could talk about when and why that would make sense. But that's all totally flexible. You would just put it in your agreement and you're off to the races. You have the same liability protection as a corporation. A corporation is no more protective of your personal assets than an LLC. And then the last part, control, is totally flexible. So again, remember, a corporation is rigid but predictable. In a LLC, it's totally flexible. You can decide who gets to make business decisions, how and when. Just like a corporation, it's actually really easy to form. So here's all the information you have to provide. It's literally names and addresses. That's it. Super easy. And then I put down here, just like on the corporation, but wait, there's more, except for in this case, there doesn't have to be more, but there might be, you might choose to do more. So the operating agreement is this document that would be an agreement that governs how money gets split up and who gets to make decisions. This is one of my I will say, if it's just you, it's still a good idea to have an operating agreement, but you don't need it. You don't strictly have to have it. And if there's multiple owners, I'd say it's a great idea to have an agreement, sort of like a prenup for your business, which is just a great idea when you're talking about businesses. And the last piece, who should form an LLC? And this slide right here is probably the one, if you're taking notes at home, this is the slide that I hope you sort of walk away with. So in a corporation, I said there's probably none of you that a corporation may not make sense for most of you. I suspect that this describes virtually all of you. So consider forming an LLC if you're doing business, you have assets you want to protect. Your business involves some risk, with an asterisk that all business involves some risk. Diane talked about a lot of the risks, especially with farmers and ranchers. And then the last one is you have $100. That's all it takes. It's actually $104.50 by the time you add the credit card processing fee online. So if you have, I'll amend it. If you have $104.50 and you want to protect your personal assets, then I think forming an LLC is probably a good idea for you. And you may have heard of lots of other forms. So there are actually lots of other options. So a limited partnership is an investment vehicle. So it probably doesn't apply to you. A limited liability partnership would be very similar to an LLC, but with fewer options. So that's why I didn't talk about it in detail. There's PLLPs and PLLCs. Those are for like accountants and lawyers and geologists. Probably doesn't apply here. Cooperative. So in Idaho, a cooperative is not a separate type of legal entity. They're usually formed. They're actually usually corporations or unincorporated entities. For example, the Snake River. Diane mentioned the Snake River Seed Co-op is a cooperative, but it's actually formed as a corporation. Nonprofit corporation. Again, it could be an option depending on what your goals are. And there are others. You may have also heard of something like called a B Corp or a B Corporation. That's similar to, it's a certification similar to being certified like organic or free trade. So it's not a separate type of entity. Any kind of legal entity can get certified as a B Corp. Benefit corporation is an option. If you want to form a corporation, you can become a benefit corporation, which just means you get to consider not just making money as your corporate purpose, but also creating a public benefit. And then there's other ownership types like employee owned, probably doesn't apply to a lot of you. The last piece I'll say is there's this thing, assumed business name, or a DBA. And so you can file these with the Secretary of State. I could file one today that says, I am doing business. I'm I'm doing business as the Carrot Man. I know that's this dumb example, but I could go to the Secretary of State and file that. And then I would be able to do business under that name. But it would point, it's just like wearing a name tag. It doesn't actually provide me any protection. It's not a legal entity status. All it is a name tag, so that if somebody says, oh, I did business with this guy that called himself the Carrot Man, and his carrots were awful and I want to sue him, they could go to the Secretary of State, figure out who I was through that assumed business name. So those are the main options. There's a question that came in: can operating amendments? Can operating agreements be amended? The answer is yes. Can it be done mid-fiscal period? The answer is yes. Or would an amended agreement need to coincide with the IRS tax year? And the answer there is it depends. So if the amendment affects your taxes or the way that taxes will be allocated to the members, you need to talk to your accountant to understand when the best time to make those changes effective would be. Typically, if you're amending the agreement you just need to deal with it. So it would be a conversation you need to have with your accountant. But as the lawyer, if you came to me and said, I want to amend this, and man, my accountant says I want to make it effective July 1st, that easy enough. From an attorney standpoint, it's very easy to do. And the other question, you can name your LLC as well, correct? The answer is you have to name your LLC. So you actually have to see, I'm gonna go off script here and see if I can get here. When you go to how to form, the name of the limited liability company is and blank, you got to fill that blank in. So you actually have to name your LLC. You don't have to have an alternative, an assumed business name filing. So if I formed an LLC and called it the Carrot Man LLC, I wouldn't need to file a separate assumed business name filing. I would just be able to do business as the Carrot Man LLC. So let's see, and then I will just end on this slide. About me is the least important part. Other than that, I just finished my homemade green sriracha sauce and it was okay, but I'm willing to try again. And just to tell you briefly, I said about resources, the Entrepreneurship Law Clinic, we do free pro bono legal services for folks. Third-year law students do all the work I supervise. There's a website there that you can find, and I know none of you or most of you are not in Boise. This is something I'm particularly proud of. So we actually represent all of the counties. With yellow are counties where we already have active clients. So we have the great state of Ada there, but you can also see we have 10 other counties in the state. My goal, at least in the next 5 years, is to make sure that this whole state is painted yellow. And so we can absolutely work with people all over the state and welcome the opportunity. So that's I'm 3 minutes over my goal. Not bad for a lawyer who loves to talk. So there's one other question. I have an LLC. I need a source of ranch farm, or do I need a source of ranch farm operating agreement? Yeah. And you paid an attorney $1,000 for something that doesn't pertain to you. Not an uncommon story. So to me, there would be nothing special about a ranch or a farm operating agreement versus some other business, but it needs to be tailored to the owners. So the operating agreement itself would look very similar probably to two people who wanted to start a technology company, for example. It's all about figuring out who gets to make business decisions and how the money and expenses get split in order at the end of the day. So let's say you make $10,000. Who gets that $10,000? Who gets which share? And let's say there's a new contract. Diane talked about like all of these different revenue streams. Let's say there's a new great opportunity, but it's going to require a big capital investment. who gets in the business, who gets to decide whether to move forward with that opportunity or not. Those are the kinds of things that would be in the operating agreement. You may not know from reading the operating agreement that the business itself is a ranch or a farm. So without knowing, the specifics of your situation, it's hard to say, but the operating agreement needs to be tailored to your business, but it doesn't necessarily need to be a special ranch or farm operating agreement. If you're both growing and producing value-added products, is it worthwhile to create multiple LLCs to isolate risks? It might be. The administrative burden of keeping track of multiple LLCs at some point outweighs the benefit of having all of those little sort of pockets of liability protection. So it would just depend on how much revenue, for example, you were taking on, or you were going to make from a separate business, and how much risk was associated with that separate business. I know it depends, unfortunately. Can I form an LLC? Y'all are testing my live reading skills. Can I form an LLC that represents my entire homestead and farm and then create different DBAs for different product lines? Yes, you can. There might be a reason to separate your garden produce from your woodcraft products for liability purposes or for equipment ownership purposes. So for example, a lot of times it makes sense to own the land as a separate LLC and then have the producing farm as a so you own the land as under one company, and then your farm is a separate company. There may be reasons why you would want to do that with things like garden produce versus woodcraft products. How you own the equipment. A lot of this stuff is tax driven, and so you would want to talk to accountants. And Colette, I'm sorry, I just put my lawyer hat on, and I haven't stopped talking yet. So you obviously have expertise here as well. So by all means, jump in if you've got something else to add.
Yeah, I appreciate everything you're saying, Nick. I think the only thing that I would add in terms of thinking about liability and insurance products is, and we can talk about this on our webinar where we're talking about insurance and liability, is what kind of policy is going to cover the work that you're going to do, and can you have integrated policies or separate policies? And then I was going to bring up exactly what you did, that oftentimes people have their land be separate than their production enterprise, and things are held separately, and then there's a formal like lease agreement from the production business to the LLC or even the individual who owns the land, and they're paying for use of that land. Right. And so those are definitely things to think about in terms of taxes, in terms of liability, but also for your farm ultimately to think about in terms of succession. Is there an opportunity at some point in time for you to transfer that farm business? And if you see that in your future, are you going to want to do that with the land or separate from the land? So these are kind of vision goal driven, but being really clear about those business goals is going to help you identify that next step and make good use of your time with people like your attorney or your tax advisor.
Right. Volunteering on a farm, how am I liable when I do that? So generally speaking, this is just sort of first year of law school 101. If you have a duty not to harm other people, and so if you do, you may be liable for it. And so there's all sorts of legal theories about why you might be liable if a volunteer, who's there on your farm helping out ends up injuring somebody. The idea generally is that somebody has to pay for that injury, and the law tries to sort out who pays. So there's it's not unknowable, but it's a bigger conversation than probably what we can cover here. Or at least the other question here: what is the advantage of land in a trust versus a separate LLC? I think to Colette's point, it's all about succession, ownership, control, tax advantages. So it needs to be part of a conversation with your estate planning professionals as well. So how do you want the business, the farm, the physical farm versus the operations of the farm? How do you want those to move forward in time? And it's a relatively complex problem that involves some risk. It involves tax planning, and the advantage, it just depends on your situation versus for whether it would make more sense to have land owned by a trust versus in a separate LLC. And that's the question you'll get from a lot of attorneys, is it depends, until you actually have a chance to sit down, because what it depends on is the kinds of things that you would sit down and talk to an attorney about in longer than a 20-minute short presentation. But I love that there are questions, because that means you're thinking about it. And I think a lot of people go on autopilot and they either don't want to think about it, or they don't know to think about it. And so as you're thinking about your business and what the risks are, those are opportunities to think about how can I protect myself, and not just for me, but for either future generations or people who depend on you now. So
that's a great segue, Nick, into a question I have, and I think actually I have two questions. One is, in many situations, you have a husband and wife partnership, like as in marriage, and
yep.
you are one or both people are involved in the farm. How does that play out in terms of business structures?
Yeah, so Idaho is one of 5 states nationwide that is a community property state. So co-owning a business with family is always complicated, and it's especially complicated in Idaho. And so it factors into it. I will still stand by my earlier statement that says a general partnership is always a bad idea. So meaning you're doing business with somebody without creating a formal structure for it, without having written rules of engagement. Even if you're husband and wife, I still think it's a bad idea. It's worth getting it's worth getting the liability protection for your marital assets. So form a corporation, you can co-own it together and decide however you want, just get those shields up. But then also, in the case of divorce or death or other life circumstances happen, it's worth having the business as a going concern be protected. And so I see all the time, I see businesses that are great businesses that have lots of real potential or have a steady stream of income, but then when the owners start fighting, the viable business goes away because they weren't able to sort of sort out their differences. And so those are opportunities that you go from having something to having nothing. And as y'all are probably aware, people still find a way to fight over nothing all the time. But I'd rather, better to make a plan, of course, just like Diane was talking about, when you plant, or when you're thinking about the next season, you plan on having the worst possible weather. That's risk management. So we think about all of the worst case scenarios and then, hope for the best, but hope is not a plan. So actively encourage folks to make a plan. Another question, should we be talking to an estate law attorney? I think that everybody who might die someday should act, which is all of you, should absolutely think about what you want to happen to your stuff when you pass. And so as part of that thinking process, it probably makes sense if you have assets like land or a farm or a business as a going concern. I think it probably makes sense to talk to an estate planning attorney who are specialists in both business succession planning. They can help you figure out how your business will continue after you, as well as what happens to grandma's diamond ring, who gets it, and trying to minimize that what is already a stressful time for your family. You can really do them a huge service by having plans in place. And inevitably, this is against my self-interest, but the less of your money that ends up in the attorney's hands when you die, I figure is probably a success. So do a little bit of planning in advance, talk to accountants and attorneys, and make a plan for sure.
Thank you, Nick. I have one final question before we move on to Diane, and it's a nice segue from the question that we just had. What happens if one of the owners dies in different business structures?
Yeah, so the cool part of if you form an LLC or a corporation, so you form a formal legal entity, there are rules that govern what happens. So it will continue. So the business will survive the death of an owner. And what happens when somebody dies will all be dealt with in that written agreement. So it's already dealt with in advance. Versus a sole proprietorship, it doesn't, again, it's kind of this fiction. It's not even really a thing for legal purposes. So clearly the sole proprietorship will end when you die, but that doesn't end the liability that might have come up. So, if I hurt somebody right before I pass away, my estate, the creditors can still collect against my estate. So it's not, even in death, there's disadvantages to being a general partner or a sole proprietorship. Again, there are so few circumstances where not forming a legal entity for a business that you're doing on purpose I just actively encourage people to think through and then decide, get some advice, and then decide what to do as you go forward. But the answer is you can choose what happens, and you can make a plan, and it will survive your death on a go-forward basis.
Great, thank you so much. That was a great overview of business structures, a lot of things for everyone to think about. And I would just really encourage people to think, what are your personal goals and what are your business goals? Get those written down so that you can be really clear when you meet with an attorney and you meet with your accountant what you want to achieve. They're going to have tools to help you achieve that. But if you don't know what you want when you go in, that could be a lot more costly for you. If you're looking for any type of materials around succession planning, estate planning, please contact me offline and I will see if I have some things that kind of help you, like tools to help you think through what your goals are and prepare for those really important conversations. So our next speaker is Diane Green. Diane's going to share a bit of experience that she has with her farm and thinking about business structures. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Diane.
Here. So I don't really have, I've just put these slides up there for perspective, and this came out of our Protecting Your Farm or Ranch book, and mostly I just wanted to share my story, which I think I have made every mistake you could possibly make in going through this process, and I really wish I had someone like Nick there and to advise me in the beginning. But like in 1989, when we first decided we were going to seriously go into farming as a livelihood, I had a sister-in-law who was an accountant for a local logging company here in Sandpoint, which was a small business, and she seemed to know a lot of things about taxes and business, and so we hired her to do our taxes and took her advice, and she said, well, you got to become a partnership. So we went through the legal structure and registered as a partnership, and we utilized this partnership for maybe 4 or 5 years as we went started growing our business, and before we actually hired another accountant. And what we realized, one, was having taken advice from a family member was not the best choice for trying to come up with a business structure or doing accounting or starting out. But I think I think a lot of us in farming and as being entrepreneurs in small business, my observations have been with myself and with many others, we come into farming or ranching with a passion for what we're doing. And when we discover that, yes, this is something I want to do to live a sustainable lifestyle, meaning that I'm making money doing what I love on my land, on my farm. And we don't, well, for myself, I had zero information or experience as far as bookkeeping, or I mean, I just was not up on very many things, and taking advice from my sister-in-law was really not the best way to go. And in hindsight, we moved through that process, and not until we had after her doing taxes, and every year it seemed like we were paying a mass amount of tax, which was really bothersome that we were paying so much in in federal and state taxes when and I still don't know exactly what all happened, other than when we got away from that general partnership and went into hired another accountant who specialized in small businesses, who then advised us to go into an S corporation, which we of course found out that that was a bad choice as well. So we went through all the paperwork process to file as a corporation on the advice of this new accountant. And she specialized in small businesses, and we were referred to her by one of our other friends, who really, when it came down to it, she did not have any background in farming. And as over the years, one of the things that we've really discovered was that it was really important that we had an accountant that had some background, so they at least, I mean, in the first 5 or 6 years, she never filed a Schedule F for farming. That never happened. We didn't get the tax credits or for anything for our losses or gains or anything like that for being a farm, which we later found out that we could have. And we kind of went through blindly trusting, oh, sorry about that, trusting that people would, I had that turned off. Stop calling. Sorry. See, I even thought I had the phone turned off and I didn't. We put our trust in people that we should not have put our trust in, because once we went through the process of filing for the S corporation, which cost us money up front, as far as, and I'm sorry, I don't know how to turn that stupid thing off, but at any rate, the new accountant informed us that we had been overpaying our federal taxes, and she was able to refile for like 3 years back, and we got a considerable amount of money back because we were overpaying from the sister-in-law who didn't really know what she was doing. We totally put our trust in this person and used her for many years, and we were using this new accountant as our business was growing. This is when we were at the peak of our growing our business. We had 6 restaurants, we had 2 grocery stores, we had a 30-member CSA, we had the farm stand. I was doing 2 farmers markets a week. I was making deliveries in town twice a week. So the income stream was happening. And one day I get a call from the local sheriff's office saying that our accountant had been arrested for embezzling money from the small businesses that she was working with. So we were one of about 20 small businesses that were basically ripped off. Stop it. I'm sorry. They won't stop. I can't turn it off.
Well, we can't
And,
hear it, Diane.
sorry. But when the sheriff called and told us that, I said, no, there's no way. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. So we went down to the police station and he showed me all the paperwork, and sure enough, we lost several $1,000s. And and ended up searching for another accountant, and it was the lesson learned in both of those. And from listening to Nick, I really appreciate the information that you gave. And if I were starting over, I would not have made those mistakes. I certainly would not have used a sister-in-law who didn't have, I mean, she had her expertise, but it did not apply to farming. And when I went to the other accountant, she had her expertise too, which seemed to work in embezzling more than business, but I trusted her, and it was. So by the time we went through all of that and then dissolved the corporation because of all the paperwork and the involvement, I mean, for filing taxes, it seemed to be a pretty costly thing. And for what we were having to, because the accountants charge by the forms that they fill out. And if you're filling out the losses and gains and deductions and credit and federal income and individual tax rates and all that, it just ended up costing us more. So, and we ended up through all of that, went, okay, we're dissolving the corporation. This is after being a partnership. We dissolved the corporation, and we are a sole proprietorship. Now it is and I had this question for Nick, but I'll follow through with this. And once we filed as a sole proprietorship, and then the thought was, being a woman-owned business, that I would be eligible for some funding opportunities. And I'm not sure that has happened one way or another, but that was kind of in my thought. We also, at the time when I filed for a sole proprietorship, my husband had his own small business doing forestry contracts. So we decided that we would each have our sole proprietorship doing what we were doing. And it was simple then when with tax season came to file jointly. And since then, my husband is retired from that and is just farming. But using just our social security number and EIN number for the tax filing. But with the sole proprietorship, with that, we do maintain $1 million business insurance policy for our farm and everything that we do on our farm. So since I've already tried 3 different realms, now I'm wondering, my question for Nick would be, is that $1 million policy that I have, and I meet with our insurance person every year and go through a list of what we're doing as far as people coming on the farm, our workshops, all the different activities that we've had every single year, we go through that, and we pay about $1,200 a year in insurance to make sure that we're protected with that. And I know that these the coming up with a legal entity for your business structure is really about that protection and that liability protection. So my question to Nick is does my being a sole proprietorship with this insurance coverage, am I okay with that? Does it make more sense for me to now switch to an LLC? And it was my understanding that if I had the personal liability insurance that I would be okay with that. But if
Yeah. So
I'm willing to go one more.
yeah. Yeah. So it might be helpful. Diane, you and I can kind of workshop this because it might be maybe helpful for other people as they think about their own structure. So I find myself turning more and more into my dad every year for better or for worse. So my 3 things of advice for all small business owners: how to not get sued. Number 1, don't be a jerk, right? Yeah, and Diane, you talked about that. Good customer service, right? Just being kind goes a long way. Number 2 is get good insurance. So that's the second most important thing. And then the third thing would be to then talk to a lawyer. So I think the fact that you have an insurance policy in place is a huge and very important step. That's probably more important than having your legal structure in place, because I'd much rather have a big pile of money to use to make problems go away than a piece of paper to wave in front of a judge. So I think the fact that you have an insurance policy is awesome. I think we can get into it later, but you're talking about how you have a sole proprietorship, but then you're also talking about our farm. And I immediately am think, going back to my slide, if you're doing business with somebody else and you haven't formed a separate business entity, then you will be automatically considered a general partnership. And so I have some questions that you and I can talk about, and I'd be happy to talk about offline later.
Okay.
But so saying so doesn't make it so. There's sort of these legal defaults that happen. So the law will decide what you are unless you do the things you need to in order to decide you're something else. So yeah. So
Right.
I've got questions, but as to whether $1 million is sufficient or not is a great thing to talk to your insurance broker about. If you told me it was $50,000, I'd have some real concerns, because $50,000 in 2023 won't make very many things go away. Your goat scratching the paint on somebody's car it would be several $1,000s, for example. So
Right.
all
Right.
good. I don't want to steal your time, but I jumped
No,
in.
well, no,
and-
it's I've been thinking about shifting to an LLC, and I always had thought that the insurance was enough. And really, when we talk about risk, an awful lot of it has to do with protecting our farm and whatever we can. And I know that the LLC would give me a little bit more of an umbrella to cover that. So
Yeah, and it's not an either or. So I would recommend insurance and the appropriate legal entity protection. And that's
Right.
general advice to everybody listening is belts and suspenders. Keep those britches up.
Right. So, and yeah, that was my big thing. And I put some information in here about LLCs, but I thought if we had time, if anybody was an LLC in the attendees that was interested in talking about that at all, if they'd be willing to share what that was like for them. Was that a very difficult thing? I mean, I went to the Idaho information about business structures, and it said it was between 100 and 800. That seems like a pretty broad spread there.
In Idaho, it's $100. In other states, it would cost more.
Okay.
Like in California, for example, there's a franchise fee that's about $800 a year. In Idaho, it's only going to cost you $100, and you'll have to annually file an annual report, but it doesn't cost any money to file. It doesn't currently cost any money to file. So it's literally, and like I said, you pay with a credit card online, it's $104.50. So.
Right. Well, I've tried I've tried 3 different kinds, so I might as well go for another one. But I think it's really, I share my story because maybe others have gone through that. I mean, I've made a lot of bad decisions over the years with farming, with business with all kinds of things, and I've learned from them. And as long as you're learning and adapting and changing, and a lot of the rules and regs are always changing, a lot of things are changing all the time. And for us as farmers, it's crucial that we adapt to those changes as we need to. So I will probably adapt and be filing for LLC later this week. What the heck? Why not?
Thanks, Diane. One thing I always appreciate about co-teaching with you is that you are so willing to share your lessons learned. And I think you shared a couple of really important ones today about, really working with professionals that understand farming and ranching. And that is super key in all you do as a direct farm marketer, with a farm or ranch. And then another thing I think about with an LLC, again, is if you take on a new business partner, having a structure that you're able to think about how to do that over time. And I do know that there are farms that have formed as an LLC and have had multiple members in that LLC, but things change in people's lives. Members have left and the farm still remains. And so thinking about the flexibility of your structure, I think is another important piece. So again, thank you for that presentation. I'm going to quickly share my screen and share some last slides from today's webinar and talk a little bit about where we're going. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar today, we are in the process of developing a new direct marketing guide for producers in Idaho. And this guide is really going to be up to date about the rules and regulations that govern direct farm marketing in Idaho. It's going to provide some great tips for operating. And because you've participated in this webinar live, you will receive an announcement when the guide is published this summer, and you'll have an opportunity to either check it out online if that's your preference, or for free to be able to sign up to receive a printed copy of the guide in the mail. If you are watching this as a recorded webinar, please email me at cdephelps@uidaho.edu. And I would be happy to make sure that you are on a list, or even better yet, visit our website at cultivatingsuccess.org and sign up for our email newsletter. And with our email newsletter, you'll receive links for upcoming programming or announcements of upcoming programming. And you'll also receive information about how to receive a copy of the printed guide when it is available. Of course, we would love your feedback on this webinar. You will have an evaluation that generates automatically if you're watching this webinar live. After the webinar concludes, it will take probably about 3 minutes for you to complete that evaluation. We would love your feedback. And tomorrow you will also receive an email with a follow-up link to that webinar survey. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the Cultivating Success website under our recorded webinars page. Upcoming webinars. Tomorrow, we are going to be talking about understanding insurance and liability, and then delving deep into farm labor, looking at hiring employees, and then in Idaho, what is an intern and what is a volunteer? I think these are going to be incredibly informative presentations. They're really going to build on a lot of the conversations we had today. We hope you can attend. And then we're skipping down to the last week of March for our final 2 webinars. On the 28th, we're going to be talking about complying with specific product rules and quarantines, which Diane introduced today, and also delving more into labels and voluntary certifications. And then on the 29th, we're going to move into talking about processing poultry, selling eggs in Idaho, and then looking at prepared foods and what are the cottage food rules in Idaho. Again, visit Cultivating Success webpage to sign up for our newsletter and also to sign up for any of the upcoming webinars. So with that, thank you again for joining us today. Many thanks to all of our presenters, to Nick and Diane and to Mackenzie for all her technical support. And thanks to you all for doing the great work you do to bring local food to tables in Idaho. Have a great day, and we hope to see you tomorrow.